and kicks, but dressed up as science, dressed up as a viable challenge to climate change science. And what he did has ramifications that will go on for generations and generations and generations. So that's...
Over the past 16 years, Britain's political landscape has been shaped not just by policy, but by narrative. Today, we're examining a critical argument: how media coverage and misinformation campaigns have fundamentally distorted our understanding of major political decisions, from the 2008 financial crisis to the present day. What happens when the true story gets buried by the Murdoch mangle? And what does that mean for how we evaluate our current leadership? Stay with us as we unpack the hidden history of modern British politics.
I don't know why I've just adopted a voice slightly reminiscent of John Major there. That's who I'm probably most reminded of by Keir Starmer. And I would remind you that John Major came in for extraordinary amounts of abuse and repeated predictions of his imminent downfall, and then he won a general election against Neil Kinnock, against expectations, although last time I spoke to Neil Kinnock about it, on full disclosure, he explained that he wasn't actually that surprised by the result. And if you were paying proper attention at the time, rather than being led by the nose by some of the media coverage, you too would not have been that shocked by his defeat. I don't know what the history books have judged on that question, but I mention it because 2020 hindsight is a wonderful thing. You see it a lot at the moment with Gordon Brown. You know, the idea that he was hounded out of office by a sort of, really just a sort of attack. I remember when one television presenter, I think it was Jeremy Clarkson, called him a one-eyed Scottish idiot. And you sort of thought, this isn't normal. This is not normal. It was a clever little move of Clarkson's, really, in a way, setting the tone for the direction in which British politics would go in the next 16 years. By being very, very ad hominem and vile. And now you look back on that and it doesn't really stand out at all in the lexicon of political insults. But at the time, I remember thinking it was absolutely disgusting behaviour. That was long before he was calling for the Duchess of Sussex to be paraded naked through the streets of this country and pelted with manure or something. I've forgotten the finer details of that remarkable intervention. And he remains one of my favourite journalists. So, you know, I'm very weird. And I suspect that Starmer won't enjoy that. If this is the end of the pier for Keir, I suspect that he won't enjoy that retrospective reassessment. I don't know, I could be wrong. But I don't think people will look back and say, God, if only we'd realised what we had at the time. I tell you what, it was time for John Major to go, but he was a lot better than we gave him credit for. Some of the speeches he gave, correctly identifying exactly what would happen if this country left the European Union, will stand the test of time. And so with Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling's mission to save the world's economy, one of them flying uninvited to meet with single market finance ministers, because, of course, although we were in the EU at the time, we weren't in the single currency, so we didn't actually get a seat at that table necessarily. But Gordon Brown turned up and essentially led the agenda, essentially put the policies in place that would bring the country, bring the world back from the precipice. Alistair Darling, meanwhile, flew to the United States of America to make exactly the same case for exactly the same policies, and they prevailed. It's extraordinary to me. There are two things, I think, from the last 50 years of current affairs that in a better world they would be understood and known by everybody. That's the first. That's the domestic version. I should jot this down, actually, because I am in the process of agreeing to writing another book, and this is kind of on the theme that the book is going to be about. That's the first. That Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling really did lead the world when it came to recovering from the 2008 global financial crisis. I mean, it is horrible to contemplate what might have happened if they had not prevailed. That's something that the entire country should have taken pride in. That's something that every single British person could have worn as a badge of honour. Our boys led the way. But of course, by the time it had been through the Murdoch mangle and the Daily Mail misinformation machine, the global financial crisis of 2008 was all Gordon Brown's fault. And by the time David Cameron became Prime Minister in 2010, the response to the global financial crisis of 2008 was to start shutting libraries in Wolverhampton and Sure Start centres in Kensal Green. That's how the world turns. So if it had been properly understood, that Brown and Darling led the world on that, then history would look very different. That's point one. Point two is Don Perlman, this bloke I'm going to return to again and again and again because I was deeply ashamed by how little I knew about him and the work he did when it came to scuppering the Kyoto Climate Agreement. And this bloke, who was like the godfather of Tufton Street with no scientific qualifications whatsoever, set up an organisation that sounded fancy schmancy scientific and started, while being on the payroll of all the big oil producers in the country, scuppering all of the legislation designed to make the world a healthier, safer place to live. And that was it, just for money and kicks. But dressed up as science, dressed up as a viable challenge to climate change science. And what he did has ramifications that will go on for generations and generations and generations. So
here's the uncomfortable reality. Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling led the world through the 2008 financial crisis, yet the public narrative blamed them for it. Jeremy Clarkson's 2009 attack on Gordon Brown wasn't just a personal insult. It signaled a shift toward increasingly hostile, fact-free political discourse that would define the next decade and a half. The speaker raises a crucial question we should all consider. How much of what we believe about recent British history is based on actual events, and how much has been filtered through corporate media interests? As we assess current political leaders like Keir Starmer, it's worth asking ourselves whether we're learning from this pattern or repeating it. The story we tell about our politics shapes the future we build.